Yay. So thank you everyone for coming. My name is Eleanor, and I am a super geek when it comes to historic vegetables. That is kind of like my little joy. Mostly come at it from a gardening perspective, then not so much a culinary perspective. But with that, it allows for some fun deep dives into the history of various vegetables, and I come at it kind of more from a botanical lens on all of that. So for this class, it's going to be coming at it from kind of more of the European aspect of it all, and then also from the European science aspect of it all, not the traditional ecological knowledge. Um, so with that, is my screen showing up? Yay.
Yes, it is.
Yay, thank you very much. And again, feel free to jump in with any questions. I don't know if I'm going to be able to see my chat. So just, oh, I am. But yeah, feel free to jump in and interrupt at any time. So what I'm hoping to cover is pretty much just what is a pumpkin from a botanical perspective. We're going to be focusing mostly on three main types, the maxima, the moschata, and the quipo. And we'll get into what exactly those are a little bit later. We're going to talk about from an archaeobotanical reference where the origin and domestication patterns are. And then looking at some of the more European historical contexts of expedition logs and herbals and things like that, where we think that kind of that introduction and usage patterns kind of started. And then a quick glance over our modern varietals that are usually available to us in supermarkets and how maybe they are or more or less applicable to the recipes that folks are pursuing. So to start off with, we're dealing with a food crop from that was, you know, domesticated from folks here in North America and Central and South America. So with that, we really want to give pause and consider the history of it from multiple perspectives. We also, I strongly encourage everyone here when you're dealing with pumpkins to think about and look at food sovereignty and about the rematriation, which is the reclaiming of seeds of the history of the natives, peoples of the land of the tribes here. And then with that, when you can buy and seeds, if you're going to be growing them from providers that are aware of this and avoid some of the ones that tend to be more problematic with that. So, big scope before we get down into the weeds. What is it? Pumpkins can be easily confused with melons in the imagery. The imagery is it's a mess. And it really just kind of depends on how you look at it, if you want to view it as a pumpkin or not. But what we can say for sure is that pre-1500s, we got bottle gourds only in Europe, right? So that's Langonaria ones. None of the cucumbers, none of the things that we think of commonly today as pumpkins. So some, what I call them safe options for pre-1600s Europe are going to be the cucumber pepo. These are things that are going to be like your sugar pie pumpkins and your acorn squashes. As we get longer, further down the timeline, C. moschata comes over. These are things like our butternuts. And then after the latest, sorry, my caffeine is not kicking in, introduction is going to be Maxima, which are going to be kind of things like our Hubbard squashes or our turban squashes and things like that. Big step back out. This is a massive slide full of lots of information. Don't worry about it. It's just like in the grand scheme of the Cucurbitaceae family, what we're looking at is a subfamily of Cucurbitae, and with that, the genus of Cucurbita. And the other one that's highlighted here, the Binaceae subfamily, that's where you have all your melons, your bottle
Oh,
gourds, and your
oh
cucumbers. So pumpkins are pretty well
oh dear,
distinct,
what happened to your bed?
distinct uh, botanically as well. So what is a cucurbita, right? So they typically have orange flowers, five fused petals. They're separate male and female flowers, which can kind of make pollination an issue sometimes. They have a fruit called a pepo and an inferior ovary, which means that the flower part is above the fruit itself. And then they're a vine. This is one of the very first images of what we can say comfortably is a cucumber pepo or a pumpkin. It's 1510's, the end of Brittany's Book of Hours. They're just fantastically gorgeous. But with that, right, they have these three different pictures. And the one on the left is a pumpkin, but it's probably what is called a Texarkana pumpkin, which is more of the wild species of pumpkins, not necessarily an edible pumpkin. And where that comes in is there's also oftentimes a toxin that is high and higher rates in our wild pumpkins. So yes, we have documentation 1510s that they were here in Brittany, but what exactly that pumpkin was, probably that wild type. So cucumber pepo, right? We're going to go over those three main ones, the pepo, the moschata, and the maximas. So pepos are going to be our pie pumpkins, our acorn squashes, our patty pans, our crooknecks, so many fun things like that. And then with that, they tend to be a little bit more stringy because spaghetti squash is in here too. So you can kind of think about it that way, and a very mild flavor. And these are the ones that it seems were probably one of the very first ones to be introduced over into Europe. Then we go down to our cucumber moschata. These are things like our butternuts and pie pump. Well, what comes in the form of canned pumpkin these days. They tend to have a nice strong stem. They come in a wide variety of shapes and sizes. They have a nice hard stem. And yeah, so these were probably grown in, we'll get onto that later. But there's also the Caribbean calabash, which is in the subgroup, which is key when we're thinking about when folks were first introduced to these types of foods from Europe and brought them over. And then the other type that we're going to be thinking about is the cucumber maxima. These are what a lot of people think of as our heirloom squashes. They're the Hubbards, the banana squashes, and then our turban squashes. And that's going to be a key feature that you want to pay attention to when you're looking at various types of imagery. This is a turban squash here, but it has something that's called an exposed pericarp, where quite often the flower, this is the flower scar, this ridge here, and then the fruit doesn't kind of get all the way tucked in underneath the flower. It kind of exposes. It's almost like a outie belly button of sorts. And so this is kind of a key distinguishing characteristics of that. That, and also it tends to have a really corky, squishy stem. And then there's also the agrosperma. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time on these just because they tend to be a little bit more difficult to find in your grocery store. Sometimes, if you're lucky, you can find one in a farmer's market. But these are the Kershaw squashes. They're also called silver seed. They make amazing roasted seeds. But yeah. So when we're thinking about the origins of all of this, it's difficult because there's no wild population left of what they think were the ancestors of pumpkins in general. So it gets a little bit more difficult to kind of figure out where exactly these guys were originally domesticated. But there's some hypothesized domestication origins, and most of those are going to be in there's one that's in central Mexico kind of area, and then there's one that's in more North America, but there's distinct trade routes that happen to move those seeds back and forth. The one thing to note is that for Cucurbita maxima, it was mostly a South American West Coast domestication. But again, this is all very kind of it's a gray zone. I mean, they use as much science as they can, but with the archaeobotanical record, especially when you're dealing with something as easily decomposable as a pumpkin, who knows for sure. So they rely on DNA analysis a lot for a lot of this kind of stuff. And that's what you see over broken out on the right-hand side is kind of like the core DNA corollaries. So this is a much more clear sign. So this is from the archaeobotanical record of where they actually have found different types of pumpkins in different sites, archaeological sites. Wow, I really can't speak. So anyway, so once again, so this is just where they have found it, not where they thought it was domesticated. So they have found Agrosperma, the silver-seeded, in various places, both North and Central America. Peepo, both types, both the acorn and then also the patty pan in different areas. But the thing, and then also mochata, the butternuts in more central Mexico area, but then also into the Caribbeans. That is distinct. They think that it was more of a human movement from Mexico to the Caribbeans for that one. And then again, there was lots of movement between North and Central America on some of these. The one thing to note is the maxima, that Hubbard type squash, right? It's down in South America, more on the West Coast, kind of Peru area, which is something to think about when we come to the next slide of European contact. All right, so we know where all these pumpkins were located, most likely pre-1500s, based on archaeobotanical records. But how did they get over to Europe? With that, then we can look at the exploration logs and where people were coming and when they were coming from. And so with that, we can pretty much say that, well, at least one working theory that they have out there is that the Peepos were probably the first ones to be brought over, those pie pumpkins and patty pans. And then mochata was brought over. And then finally, the maxima, once there was an explorer that made it through to the western side of South America, then that would be brought over. And so that's kind of why you can think about a little bit of a staggered timeline on when the pumpkins were introduced into Europe. So, and then also with the mochatas, they really like warm, hot growing conditions. And so they most likely just from that restrictions were probably more focused on Spain and Italy. And that's why in Europe, and in Germany, they were mostly seeing the hot pie pumpkin or the peepo. So we can also look to expedition logs, but they're a hot mess of it. There's different things like Drake's manuscript, right? The text is from 1590s, but the illustrations were added later. So who knows what they're really drawing there. And then also they're not like going in there to making like these detailed drawings of what they actually saw. And even if they did, like this one from 1585, oftentimes it was copied and details were added. So those two pictures down at the bottom, they are of the same town, but you can see the vast difference in the artistic liberty that is taken with the one that's more colorful that is from later on. So it's kind of hard to kind of try to get really super botanical with some of these descriptions. Same thing comes to the expedition logs themselves with the words. There's most everybody quotes that Christopher Columbus, and this one thing, he has calabazas. And so therefore he saw pumpkins. So there's a couple of things to look at with that. If you follow the citation trail on a lot of these, you get back to one kind of more like armchair expedition writings from the 1580s, which you're like, okay. And then you finally find the quote from Columbus, and with many products of the land and gourds or calabazas, so that it was wonderful to see. This probably is most likely a bottle gourd that they're talking about. So even though they use that same terminology, you kind of look at it and you're like, nah, they're talking about carrying water in their gourds. So most likely a bottle gourd. So, and bottle gourds were pan world. So bottle gourds exist everywhere. So, expeditions, not that. And again, as we just saw with the calabazas, is it a bottle gourd? Is it a pumpkin? It's a hot mess as well. Finally, in the 1750s, we're starting to get to see some nomenclature, binomial nomenclature, and Duchesne's kind of block them out into these three main groups that we continue on today with the maxima and the mochata and the peepos. So you look at the common names, maybe that'll be better. And no, it's a big mess as well. So you can kind of see where the origins of the term pumpkin comes from. Some people think that it's from Latin. Other people think it's from the Massachusetts tribes. And then also, we also start seeing things like Algonquin putting the term squash into the vocabulary. That's quite often. So again, terminology is not that helpful. I don't think how exactly or pinpointing when exactly pumpkins arrived over into Europe. Again, another example of just the wider range, and you all have probably seen this a ton in all of your cookery books, right? There's just so much that's out there. And the terminology changes from time to time. Are they talking about a bottle gourd? Are they talking about a pumpkin? When they say zucchini, what are they really talking about when they say zucchini? So that's a little bit more difficult to go off of as well. So, hey, let's look at some illuminations. So the very first one, besides that Book of Hours, the Anna Brittany, the Villa Farnese, which is this site in Rome, painted in 1515, very documentable, and has just this bounty in Cupid and Psyche archways. It's just astounding and gorgeous. And so a lot of people will look at A and say, aha, Cucubera maxima. Do you see that exposed pericarp? That's what we got here. But with that, yes, and if you have grown historic or heirloom melons before and let them get overripe, they will demonstrate this almost exact type of growth pattern. And for me, I look at that and I see an overripe melon, not a Cucubera maxima or the Hubbard squash types. So you definitely, in the Villa Farnese, easy to see all the different Cucubera pipos, which times out well with that early 1500s more southern kind of adaptation of the pumpkin. So, but Moschata and Maxima, I don't know. It's hard to tell. So we get a little bit more detailed in our herbals, but it's not until the mid 1500s that we actually start seeing pumpkins, and these are at least things that have enough botanical details to say clearly, yes, this is a pumpkin. So Fuchs in Germany and also Gerard from England, they have in their herbals things that are pumpkins. Fuchs is the earliest, but again, it's probably a Cucubera pepo, so your pie pumpkins. So what does that all mean for us? So again, pre-1500s, you only have bottle gourds. You're going to start that introduction probably most likely with Cucubera pepo early on. That's definitely being able to identify it and say, yes, this was domesticated there. And then Moschata coming in, and then Maxima later. So, yay. What does this mean if we are going into the grocery store? Oops. So when we're looking at what is today's pumpkin that we can buy, there has been a lot of breeding that has occurred in the last few hundred years to kind of shift these pumpkins around a lot. Typically, they're being bred for a higher sugar content, or they're taking something like a jack-o'-lantern and they're totally switching it up, forgetting about the culinary experience and focusing on shape and also the stem, because everybody loves that perfect stem on their jack-o'-lantern. So these are kind of two examples here of what butternuts can look like. The one on the right hand is a more modern varietal, and then on the left is that Pennsylvania Dutch crookneck. But even when you're looking at things and you come across and you say, aha, I got a turban squash, this has got to be historical. Even within the turban squashes, there's different types of adaptations, and they tend to have a lot higher sugar content than our heirloom types. I was just surprised when I roasted one up and it was just like caramelization just oozing out of it, which is gorgeous. And yet, is it historical? I don't know. So in the grocery store, when you're looking at the Cucubera pepo, if you want to be super safe on your timelines, right, look at your pie pumpkins, your acorn squashes. I mean, it's hard to go wrong with an acorn squash or a pie pumpkin. Although the pie pumpkins, right, try to stay away from those super sweet ones. And just kind of get more of your basic pie pumpkin. If you're doing a zucchini or a more summer squash types, look for the crooknecks and the patty pans. And then if you're trying to explore the Moschata types, grab a can of pumpkin. Sure, why not? It's close enough. Maybe think about reducing the amount of sugar in your recipe, but it's pretty much there. The texture is going to be very similar in the taste. And then if you are feeling daring and you want to ride the gray zone of when exactly the Cucubera maxima comes in, there's this whole massive array of heirloom pumpkins that exist out there that you can try and play around with that have different types of taste and flavors. Although by the names, a lot of them were from, were kind of species or varietals that were created in Europe. So perhaps not the most historically accurate if you're looking at that pre-1600 timelines. So, yep, Cabocha is our maxima. All right, so that was way too much information, I'm sure, and listening to me babble on. But with that, are there any questions about any of this?
Eleanor, I have one. Other than the bottle type gourds, which are containers, did Europeans have edible gourds? I know there are edible gourds currently, in Asian cuisine, but did Europeans have, other than cucumbers, have gourds that they ate?
Yeah, very much so. So the bottle gourd is, we're not too sure how it got around the world, but it got all around the world for a very long time early on. So they're even contemplating maybe as like one of those Pangea types of plants that then was distributed that way. And within that, then people started to kind of select it for various usage. So you do definitely have the more utilitarian, like I'm going to use it to carry water or make a sitar out of, right? Those are all bottle gourds. But then there was also the selection for culinary purposes. They tend to be kind of like a little bit more longer and like your trombotino squash almost, and tend to use earlier and less mature when they're vegetables. But they definitely had bottle gourds for culinary purpose. Yeah.
Thank you.
Eleanor, I have a question.
Yeah.
I live in Southern California, and there's a city nearby called Calabasas, which makes me think that there were pumpkins there. You said there were no wild pumpkins, but I grew up in an area of Los Angeles, literally on the border of LA, and there were wild fields beyond our neighborhood. And we used to go through them, and we used to see pumpkin vines growing with little cute green stripy pumpkins. Are those wild pumpkins or are they feral pumpkins?
Ooh, it could be both, right? Because by now, who knows? So they still, sorry, thank you for that. So they still have, you can still go out and find the Cucuber Pepo texicana or Cucuber texicana, which is a wild type of pumpkin that grows a lot like along the Gulf of Mexico. And that might be what got brought over and that you're seeing. But what we no longer have is that ancestral pumpkin. What they think that all current culinary pumpkins was derived from.
Gotcha.
And there's a really fun paper if you want to geek out, and it ties the extinction of megafauna, so like giant sloths and things like that, to the extinction of the ancestor of the culinary pumpkin, because they thought it became like an adaptive trait of the ancestor of the culinary pumpkin to be distributed by the megafauna. And so when the megafauna died out, the ancestor died out.
That's good. I like that.
Who knew mammoth poo would be that important? But yeah. And then there's also a lot of other species within that family of the cucumbers that are wild types that often are found growing. Like even here on the coast of Oregon, we have some that look almost like bitter gourds kind of stuff. So that might be it. But in California, who knows, right? There's so much agriculture that's been going on around there.
Do you mean like the bitter gourd that
California?
Do you mean like the bitter gourd that Kipling mentions, the Kerala?
I am unfamiliar with that citation of the bitter gourd. I was just kind of thinking of like the spitting cucumbers and that kind of stuff because of their shape and form looks a lot like a wild pumpkin could be.
Mhm.
But yeah, that's cool.
Just so people know, I will be touching on squash recipes in my class later today.
Very cool. Have you found a difference in the different types of squashes to how they cook?
Not that much. The one that I'm discussing in depth in my class, I used a butternut for, but I have done some of the other squash recipes from this particular manuscript I'm working on, and one specifically says for a round squash. So I found something that looked, it was kind of the color of an acorn. It's like that nice dark green, but it was not pointed and ridgy. It was more spherical because it said
Ooh,
round squash. So I got a round squash. Yeah, like
yeah,
that.
like that. Yeah, and so these would be the Caribbean squashes, which would be very applicable if it has the nice hard stem and not the quirky one. Yeah, very cool.
Yeah.
Diana Fiona, didn't you grow something one year that was a white flowered Roman squash? I'm looking at the Trombochino, and it seems like close to what you were growing, but that
Yeah,
wasn't that a European variety? Maybe it's just a varietal of the board of the bottle gourd.
it's what I could find at the time. There may possibly be better sources for seed at this stage of things, but at the time it was probably Lugnera, or however you pronounce that, Mr. Selenar. I can't remember.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
but it was an Italian heirloom variety that was supposed to be a gourd rather than a squash. And it did have a firmer texture than squash and a somewhat different flavor.
Yeah, spot on. Yeah, so that would have been anytime you're dealing with a white flower, that's going to probably almost always be your Langonaria, which is your bottle gourds. And there's a nice variety. The ones that are more of like the Italian heirloom types are going to kind of be that long, narrow type. The ones that are more Asian are going to be kind of shorter and squatter for the culinary aspect of it. But yeah, so very cool.
The tromboncinos that I grew have yellow flowers, for what it's worth.
And so there, that is the mess of the common name, right? And so what they're thinking most likely is that they utilized the name that they had for the bottle gourd that was a similar shape and applied that to the pumpkin of that similar shape of the tromboncino. Yeah.
Right. I
It,
just cared that it was squash vine borer resistant, and
oh
it
my
does
gosh,
indeed have the solid stem that repels the borers. And the
brilliant.
mine came from Seed Savers Exchange.
Oh, nice. Nice. That is a great source for seeds for
Yep.
sure.
I wish
Very
I got
cool.
the beginning of this. The part of her presentation that I caught was really interesting.
All right. And see if I can dump my slides into the chat too, just in case folks
Oh.
want to take a quick look at that.
Can we save them?
Yeah.
They were great.
Yeah, so pumpkins, my takeaway really is like, it's a mess out there. Do what brings you joy. If you're doing pre 1500s, use bottle gourds.
So is there a cultivar of bottle gourd that I should look for that you've grown or that somebody on this chat has grown that I should look for to try also growing next year?
It really depends what you're using it for, right? So there's tends to be different size of structural gourds, like more for baskets. There's the birdhouse. If for culinary ones, I like the tromboncinos or ones that are kind of more Italian heirloom types.
Where did you get your tromboncino seeds from if they are white flowered bottle gourds?
I got mine from a place called Nichols Nursery.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't know. There's other fantastic Thornbjorn. I think you have your hand up.
I do. Thank you. I always ask this, but I'm curious about Asia and when Western stuff started reaching Asia. Do you have any insights on when things like the C. maxima might have made it to into Asian cuisine?
So one theory, right, is that the Portuguese took the cucumber maxima over to Japan,
Okay,
and that's where we get a lot of our Kubotas.
right.
For introduction into China, I don't know.
Okay, that's reasonable. I am surprised to find in recipes which are kind of quasi-historical that there are references to things like kabocha and other kinds of squash, and I'm just sort of wondering if they're just talking about something that's really very modern, and what they would have used in period would have been one variety of bottle gourd. But so anyway, all right, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, great question.
Hey, Eleanor,
Yep.
I'm obsessed with pumpkins. They're like a couple dozen in my office at work. But what about giant pumpkins? I know they're probably modern, but I adore them.
They're impressive. I enjoy watching elephants eat them. Um,
Me
yeah, so
too.
those are going to be your maxima types and selected very specifically for that.
Right. Stephanie, you have a big backyard. I think you should grow giant pumpkins.
You'd have room for one.
Yeah, at least one.
Oh, I think I have room for a few more. Torbjorn knows. He helped me set up my garden. Actually, now I'm all gourdy now. I want to, now I want to do gourds for making things, and not just food, but
Mhm. Yeah,
musical
there's
instruments and serving vessels.
yeah.
This time
And
of year,
for
I buy all those little mini pumpkins, and they become more like pets than food, to be honest. I keep them until I can't keep them anymore, usually about April or May.
Yeah. My favorite is kabocha these days, mostly because I live around the corner from a Korean market, and they're there, in plenty, and it just the flavor is good, and they make great pies, and I'm going to be making a bunch of pies and breads with them real soon for the holidays. Nom, 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 nom.
yeah, definitely. And the texture, right? It's so smooth and thick. And that's why oftentimes if you're using like the peepo, the pie pumpkins, or the acorn squashes, you cook those and then you're like, oh, this makes sense why you want to sieve out the pumpkin before you're adding it to your dish or whatever. It's just because they can get a lot more watery and grainy texture. So
Had this long conversation about that with my stepson, who complained about the jack-o'-lantern pumpkins, and he had an aunt who made pies from them, and they weren't good.
no.
Kabocha's much better.
It is. And also the jack-o'-lanterns, they've just been so bred to be this, that ideal jack-o'-lantern shape. And also they put a lot of attention into selecting the genetics for the stem itself. It's just wild what's happening out there.
Well, it's like breeding any other agricultural product.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's for looks, sometimes it's for meat, sometimes it's for milk, sometimes it's for looks or eating. It's all got
For
different
sure.
reasons.
I have a friend who's written a couple of children's books, and I am featured in them in one way or another. The first one I was featured as Mrs. Claus, and the second one is I'm kind of the villain, not exactly, but it's a story about she gets a gourd right before Halloween, and she decides that it's just too perfect and she doesn't want to eat it and she doesn't want to cut it up. And so she keeps coming up with costumes for it to disguise it. And Chef Christie keeps coming up with a reason why that won't work and how it's going to be eaten anyway. And so it kind of goes through the year how she eventually lets him dry out so he can become a birdhouse. But yeah, so
What's
I
the
got
name of this? This is cool.
Gordon's Holiday Adventure, I think. Gordon
Gordon.
is
Uh-huh.
his name.
Gourd?
Gourdon, Gordon. It is unpublished at this point. She's got
Oh, I want to
her
see
first
it. This
her
is
first
fun.
book is actually up on Amazon. It's called The Three T's Christmas Tree. It's about different types of tortoises and turtles that want to have Christmas trees, but pine trees don't grow where they live. And so
Is this Emily?
no, it's a friend of mine she played the SCA a little bit, but
Hmm.
yeah, she has used me as inspiration. But anyway, her most recent one that we're working on currently, I just read it at a storytelling gig I did for Halloween to some of my kids that have been listening to stories for a long time, and they gave some feedback on it. So we're working on that anyway. So just as a funny little aside, I get to play the kind of evil, sort of evil Chef Christie who keeps coming up with ideas for how Gordon can get cooked into a lovely dish.
I want to support this. I want to support this venture.
Excellent. I'll let her know that it was well received amongst cooks.
Oh, very definitely.
Yeah, bring
And
it,
gardeners.
bring it. We'll buy it.
And gardeners.
We'll buy it. We'll buy it.
Cool.
Yeah, Christy, if you've got the link handy for the one that is published, toss it in chat.
Sure.
Yeah.
What's it called? I can go look it up.
The
right now.
Three T's Christmas Trees.
Because we're in my personal Zoom instead of the Kingdom Zoom because they were having a Herald's meeting today. So I was like, I don't want to mess with it. Yeah, I pay for this thing every month.
I have a paid for Zoom that opens up exactly 2 times a year when I have to use it for the virtual thing, and then I don't pay for it the rest of the year.
Oh, that's smart.
I currently my Zoom is unpaid for, and if I have to run an event or teach generally in Atlanta, then I pay for my Zoom.
Okay. Are there any questions about pumpkins? If not, we can wrap things up and head on out to some other classes. There was a question about bottle gourds for instruments, and like the sitar bass is a bottle gourd typically, and there's other stringed instruments. There's one from Africa I don't know the name of that's also a bottle gourd from that. But yeah, also those shakers, as somebody mentioned in the chat, are the bottle gourd instruments. So yeah.
Eleanor,
we're obsessed with Borneo camphor. Put it everywhere, including
Eleanor, is there
we're gonna
any sort of psychological study about why we're so obsessed with the shapes?
Look at the amount.
Ooh, that I don't know. Hey, Beverly, could you mute yourself? There's a lot of background chatter going on.
So this will make a lot of cake. So this is pretty.
Thank you. So I don't know. I have not seen any psychological studies based on the shape of that, but throughout history, right, the meaning has shifted a bit. Like the reason why they were used in the Villa Farnese garland pictures from the 1550s in Italy is because they're supposed to represent, fertility and profundity, right, and just kind of like this voluptuousness of it. But then you look, and pumpkin is a slur or a slight that you would call somebody. You're a gross, watery pumpkin. Is a quote from Shakespeare. And so, and then I think, right, because in the 1500s, maybe they were just introduced to Europe. So they kind of had like this mystique about them. And then once they became and were adopted and they were used more as a poverty food or kind of like an easy source for calories, perhaps then that, kind of got dismissed into a lesser kind of creature. But I have no idea.
But Shakespeare calls somebody else, says in description of not Olivia, but of Rosalind, he says when she's disguised as the messenger, he says that he's neither a peace cod nor a something else, and meaning that he's neither half ripe nor overblown. He's a young man. So he uses garden references like that too.
Yeah, that's very cool. Yay, gardening. Let's all garden.
Food
Eleanor?
references, yeah.
Eleanor, there's I don't recall if there are any gourds or pumpkins on it. I will look it up for you. But there is in the cathedral in Seville, there's a whole bunch of food that's carved, that's on plates, and carved between 1533 and 35. and they're in this archway in the cathedral. But I have a book on them. The book's in Spanish, hard to read.
That is
But
so
I will
cool.
check to see if there are gourds of pumpkins in there and send you those pictures. So
Please
there's no
bring
color
that.
because it's carving in stone,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
there's shapes.
That'd be amazing. Very cool. And so with all of this too, right? All it would do is take one archaeobotanical find of a seed or a stem somewhere, and the whole premise of the introduction could get upended. Oof. And they'd be like, nope, wait, we can document maxima on the east coast of North America back to 1400s. And then there you go. So that's kind of also why I try to like just be like, I don't know, this is where we are currently with the European science aspect of it all. What that means in the future, who knows? Sweet.
That's an excellent way to approach it, though. I think that's healthy. And like, yep, this is what we know right now. I could be wrong later. So
Totally.
yeah, no, I appreciate it. This is fascinating. I love you. I'm going to go back and watch this again so I get stuff that I missed. Thank you very much.
Here's
Yeah,
the
very cool.
Shakespeare quote. Malvolio says that Cesario, in other words, Violet in disguise, is not yet old enough for a man, nor young enough for a boy, as a squash is before 'tis a peas cod, or a codling when 'tis almost an apple. 'Tis him with him in standing water between boy and man.
So is that a reference to them using it as a zucchini? It's like a summer squash.
So I know, so squash is something that you eat green, and then a peas cod is when it's full blown. I don't know.
Peas cod is a pea.
Right,
Yeah.
is a pea pod.
Yeah. I'm not hearing squash in this.
He says, nor young enough for a boy, as a squash is before 'tis a peas cod.
Ooh, so then that makes me think like what translation or edition is this? Because the use of squash, that's fascinating,
Well,
right?
peas cod is a slang term for a cod piece. And
Right.
it may refer to the seeds inside.
Or the size of it and ripeness. That's what he's going at.
Full-blown peas cod would contain seeds inside. Maybe it's a slang. And he's talking about the squash not being so grown that the seeds are rattling around inside of it. It's still young enough to eat.
And the padded men's doublets of that time frame were referred to as peas cod doublets.
Exactly.
So maybe the shape, more the shape rather than the seeds or anything. It's the shape of the padded out belly.
Well, the second half is, or a codling when it's almost an apple. A codling is like a little tiny apple, the way a suckle pear is a small pear. So, I don't know.
Mysteries.
For what it's worth.
No, that's really fun. And that's again, right? It's all just kind of, I don't know, this is what we got. And so I think make of it what you all will. And really keep in mind what your overall objective is. Is it to grow the most historical pumpkin that you can find out there? If so, great. Is it to make a tasty pie? Then grab a can of pumpkin and call it good. So, hey, anything else?
Today, a pumpkin is an endearment.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. I wonder when that change came about.
I was watching the Max Miller first American pumpkin pie video last night, and he references a term for people that lived around Boston because it was adapted early in Massachusetts, and that people around the town of Boston were called pumpkins as a way to identify them as being from that area.
I saw that.
That's so cool. All right. Well, then, if there's
Thank
nothing
you very
further-
much.
Yeah,
Thank
yeah.
you.
This was a lot of fun. Hopefully, it wasn't get your spices sparked for Thanksgiving coming up and the season. The squash, we call it Squashimus around here. So I wish everybody a very happy Squashimus.
Thank you. Same
And
to
a delight
you.
of that. And thank you very much for coming, and enjoy the rest of the day. There's some amazing classes out there.